Welcome to OK Miniatures. My name is Kay, and today I'll be painting this miniature, my first miniature ever. So I bought this at the hobby store, and it is two ASMR fighters. I decided I had to choose between the one with the wings, which had a shield and sword, which is pretty cool, and then the more knight-like one with the cape. I decided to go with the normal knight-looking one since I really enjoy knights, and he seemed a little bit more simple, and especially for my first miniature. I was inspired by Jazz's Mega Mini box that came out recently. I mean, look at everything that comes in it. There's a lot that I didn't use for this mini, so there's plenty of room for growth in the hobby, from my incredibly experienced opinion. Everything I used came from that box, except the mini and parchment paper. These are the things I actually used from the box. I bought an ASMR fighter from the D&D Nulzer Marvelous Minis to paint as my first mini, since I don't have the guts to do one of Jazz's custom miniatures as my first. I'm also hoping to repaint this same miniature after some time has passed so I can compare my progress. To start off, I got the wet palette ready. According to Jazz's handy little guidebook, I used parchment paper on top of the sponge. The sponge was supposed to be wet all the way through, with the paper only being damp, except the paper wouldn't stop curling. I just dumped some water on it eventually and smoothed out the bubbles and creases, and it seemed to work okay. I used the wet palette, and then I put out all my colors. Originally, I thought I was going to use yellow, but I decided later to use black for the highlights and like the belt and other detail work. Finally, let the painting commence. We need some primer first. I remember people getting a lot of flack for not thinning their paints, so I thinned my primer. Not sure if you're supposed to, but the booklet said to do a thin coat, so it should be fine. To thin my paints, I used the highly scientific, precise method of getting my finger wet and shaking a drop of water off it until the paint seemed suitably thin. Yeah, I'm still not sure what that exactly means. Partway through the painting process, I switched to the newfangled modern methodology of dipping my paintbrush in water and letting the water drop off the brush, which actually works significantly better than my finger. Keep in mind, you don't need a lot of paint or primer for mini painting. The models are tiny. So tiny, the first time I walked into the game store, I didn't buy any because I was shocked at how small they were. A couple drops of paint will be more than enough for one model, especially since the paint will be thinned. I forgot to remove the mold lines. Well, actually, I thought the model would look fine with the mold lines until I was priming the boots. The lines were really obvious there, and after seeing those, I noticed other ones too. So I pulled out a knife and scraped them away. I'm not actually using the knife as a cutting, just scraping it perpendicular to the mold line to remove them. I probably should have spent more time removing the lines, and I definitely should have done it before applying primer. I decided to go with a red cloak and shirt with metallic armor and yellow accents, so I had painted base coats of everything. I wish I'd started with a darker red so that later I could have made the highlights red. So later I could have made the red highlights a bright red instead of pinkish. The first layer of paint did not cover very well, which YouTube videos told me to expect. I used this medium-ish brush, brush sizes. I just got my thin red paint out, mixed it up a little bit, because it did tend to settle out if you left it overnight or for a while. And then I just started painting. I painted the cape and shirt and the loincloth red. It helps get your practice in and means that if you get paint in the wrong spot, you can cover it up relatively easily. That said, you should be careful when you do your base coats. The neater you are, the easier it is later. You don't have to go back and touch up everything, which can be a real pain. After I was done with the first coat of red, I switched to the next color, which was, for me, the face, skin tones. So I just, same thing, cover all the surfaces. Here, since it's a smaller area to work on, just gotta be a little bit more precise. As you can see, there's a lot of paint on the face right now, so I just kind of used a drier brush to sponge that off. Now here's the second coat of red. You can see already how much better it's covering. And by the third coat, it was opaque. Yeah, here you can see that I have a yellow belt, which later I'll switch to black. It was kind of a nightmare to cover over, so the sooner you can decide your colors, the better. Now I'm adding a little bit of white to the shirt sleeves. Trying to leave the metal bits gray. I did originally cover the metal in the metallic paint, but later I saw that it's better if you do black paint and then highlight them using dry brushing. Will give a really nice effect. So I ended up covering up the metallic with black paint. So he's gone. Model's looking pretty good so far. I got the base coat done and pretty happy with how he looks right now. Still got some touch-up work to do, but here he is. Oh, yeah, it might be convenient to record your video over your paint palette so people can see, but it's not really a lot going on the palette for a beginner, so it's not worth the risk. But here we are again. Yep, so paint's pretty easy to remove if it's still wet. You just get your brush dry and you can kind of sponge it off. I got really good at doing that. So, yes, there was a bit of extra work for me in cleaning up all this stuff, but third time's the charm. I did learn my lesson, finally, and switched to painting over a piece of paper towel. So don't paint over your paint palette. It's kind of easy until you drop your mini. Then it's kind of a pain. And now it's time for a wash. I cleaned up my paint job after dropping it 3 times. And I originally thinned the wash. Wasn't sure if you were supposed to do that or not, so I did and hoped for the best. Same method as before. I later learned that you're not supposed to do this, so just skip this step. To apply the wash, I just kind of painted it over the entire model after mixing it up. You can see it's pretty thin right here. Just covering all the surfaces. The idea of a wash is, if you're not familiar, to get in the recesses of the model and just really give it nice shadows. And it's really remarkable what a difference a wash can make on a model. So just covering every surface, and if you want, you can focus it on certain darker shadowy areas. I didn't do that too much, and I think it turned out pretty good still. While I was waiting for the wash to dry, I did go back and read the Armor Painter's Guide, and it mentioned that you're not supposed to thin the wash. So I went back and did a full strength coat. I do think you need to be a little bit careful with applying the wash, not to take too long. I think I noticed later when I was finished that the model had a few white spots, and I suspect that might have been paint rubbed off by the wash. Not sure on that, but it seems like a thing that I've heard about. Also, there's all kinds of bubbles, especially on the cape. Those dried really nasty. I tried to get rid of a few of them, but I wasn't sure how they'd look dry, so I didn't get rid of all of them. Try to get rid of all of the bubbles. I'm not really sure why I had bubbles, but maybe I just shook the bottle too much before using it or something like that. Bubbles are bad, though. Yep, here I'm trying to wipe out the bubbles using my brush. And I think that rubbed some of the paint off of those ridges on the cape. And then later I also tried just tapping them like you would stippling, which seemed to help a little bit. So here he is, all done with the wash. He's looking pretty good in my book, which it wouldn't take too much to look pretty good. He's got some nice shadows there, a little bit of white showing through, but not too bad. And then I switched to dry brushing. I used thinned paints to dry brush, which later I found out you're not supposed to use. Use full, straight from the bottle paint. It works much better. I just did a little bit of a highlight in the more shadowy areas with the original red. Then I did a metallic highlight, dry brushing on the metals, which looked pretty good. I think it would have looked better if I had used the unthinned paint. And I did that coat twice because it just wasn't working because the paint was thin. He's looking pretty good now. I think I did a little bit of pink highlight on the red areas, which I would have preferred not doing. I would have preferred just red being the highlight. But for that to work, I would have had to use a darker red to begin with. So start darker for your base coat. That's the main thing I wish I did. Working on the eyes here, I switched to a really tiny brush, I think. Just putting a little white dot and then a black dot. It was not working out very well. It took me 3 tries, and at that point I just called it good enough. It isn't worth the effort of getting it perfect, especially first model. I think over time I'll be happier with my results and get better results. I kind of liked them, the eyes, just with the wash in it, but yeah, practice is what it takes to get perfect, so, or at least close to perfect. So I just kept trying. Each time I'll get better. I also did mess up the face using the paints and for the eyes, which was kind of a pain to go over, especially since it ruined the wash's effect on the face, which, yeah, that was a little sad, but I did, you just make the best of things. Then I super glued this guy to his base. Just a little blop, cover the base. Nothing too special. And stick them down on that base. I did find a nice little container to put my mini in, and then I covered the base with super glue and pinched little bits of gravel onto the base. Just sprinkled them on, nothing too crazy. Some of them didn't stick super well, so they came off when I was painting later. That wasn't too big of a deal. Just work with it. This container was really nice for catching all the little bits of gravel or whatever it was. I could pour it out quite easily when I was done. When that was done, I painted the base brown. Nothing fancy, just brown, and then I did a light brown highlight on the gravel. I probably should have done a few more coats on this part, but I was, again, impatient. Be patient, it's worth it. And then I did a few touch-ups. Like I said before, there was some white spots poking out, so just cover those up. And then I did a little bit of a thinned brown paint at the base of the cloak and the boots. The mini was giving me an overall muddy look, so I decided just to make that part of his character. This guy's been wandering through the forest for a good long while looking for a worthy opponent to fight. He's getting muddy. That cloak's dragged in the mud. It's not always windy. He's not always running. Oh, they dropped him again. So that cloak's getting dirty. He's probably wrapping himself in it at night when he sleeps, since he doesn't have any form of shelter with him, really. He's been traveling for a while, so yeah. If your paint job isn't quite what you want, it's alright. Just make your story fit it. And a little bit of mud goes a long way in my book, based on my vast experiences with mini painting of 3 hours. Then he's finished. Oh, I muddied up the face a little bit too. So I left out my paints for a little bit too long. This is actually, I think after a week, they're still a little bit wet. Some of them are getting dry, but I was actually impressed by how well it worked. So I pulled that up. Pick up, clean up, everybody, everywhere. Pick up, clean up, everybody, do your share. Also, this sponge was super wet, so I'm not sure if that's quite what you're supposed to have, but there was a lot of water in the sponge when I was done. Yeah, oops. Not sure if that's quite how it's supposed to happen, but that's what it took for the parchment paper to stay put. It was not cooperative. And now, the moment you've been maybe waiting for. I don't know, it's not too impressive, but here he is, all done. Eyes are a little wonky still, but I'm really happy with how he looks. He definitely fits the travel-weary knight who's been wandering for months trying to find a worthy opponent. So I'm really happy with how this turned out, and he will be on my desk for the foreseeable future. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that this helped you out, especially people new to the hobby. Yeah, do the normal things if you liked it. They help me out. They help out the YouTube algorithm, I'm told. Likes, comments, all those things. With that, have a great day. I'll see you later.